Well, hey guys, this is Peckernat Ryan DeBar. For about 3 months now, I've been planning to tell the story how Clarksburg, West Virginia ended up with two city councils at the same time, with each one claiming to be the legitimate city council and that the other one was illegal. It's quite a story, but the more I read up on that situation, the more I feel like I have to talk about Cecil Highland Sr. first. Cecil Highland Sr. was born 1876 in nearby West Milford. Around 1889, his older brother Frank opened a shoe store in downtown Clarksburg. In 1903, Cecil Highland first appears in newspapers being mentioned as assistant county clerk for Harrison County. Now, the Highland Brothers shoe store joined with a man named Howard Gore in 1904 to become Highland Brothers and Gore Shoe Shop. Gore goes on to become the United States Secretary of Agriculture from 1922 to 24, and then governor of the state of West Virginia in 1925. Cecil moves on to be the deputy sheriff in Tyler County in 1904, just 1 year after being the assistant county clerk in Harrison County. And while he's in Tyler County, he's named as a trustee for certain oil and gas estates. Maybe this is how he came into some of his money. I'm not entirely sure. Whatever the case, for many years after this, when you read one newspaper article after another, it's never quite clear where Cecil Highland really lives. He's mentioned as being a citizen of both towns, and it seems to change based on whatever the reporter at the time wants it to say. And note that at the time, this whole region of northern West Virginia was undergoing an oil and gas boom, which is several times larger than its current oil and gas boom. In fact, it was the largest oil producing region in the world until Houston overtook it in the early 1900s. Both Clarksburg and New Martinsville were growing very quickly, although Clarksburg was growing faster. And because of all the growth in Clarksburg, a lot of the neighborhoods were being built out at this time. In 1911, Cecil Highland gets control of the former Harrison County Fairground and he turns it into a neighborhood that he calls Highland Park. That is in the lower Staley area around what's now Park Avenue, just across the West End Bridge. In 1913, he purchased Golf Plaza from Nathan Golf Jr., who's getting up in years. This was about 35 and a half acres of land, which he purchased for $215,000, or $7 million in today's money. And he worked with the Horner Brothers and the Keeley Construction Company to design and build out Golf Plaza over the next 2 years. The Keeley Construction Company had just come into business a couple years earlier. Around the same time, the youngest Highland brother, whose name was Scotland, got the Clarksburg Water Board set up as a self-governing corporation under the city of Clarksburg. Yes, this man's name was Scotland Highland. Uh, you know, white people, especially rich white people, have a way of naming their kids. It's funny. Cecil Highland and his brother Virgil became directors of the Empire National Bank and took a controlling interest in the Clarksburg Telegram. The Telegram was founded in 1861 by John Carlisle, who's one of the fathers of West Virginia statehood and the movement to separate from Virginia and the Confederacy and become a Union state. And because of this, it was closely associated with the Republican Party establishment in the state of West Virginia, which was at the time pretty important on a national level. Nathan Golf and others took control of the Telegram in around 1890, and then 10 to 15 years later, the Highland brothers bought into it and became directors. Around 1910, John W. Davis, the one-time Democrat candidate for president, adoptive stepfather of Cyrus Vance Sr., started his own paper. with some of his allies. And he called it the Clarksburg Exponent, and he intended it to be kind of a opposing voice to the Telegram, which was a Republican newspaper. However, the city wasn't large enough for two newspapers to turn a profit. They both started losing money, and they merged under the common ownership of the Highland brothers in 1927. Now we've connected Cecil Highland to a lot of the biggest names of Clarksburg during its early 1900 boom years. His brother Virgil was probably an even larger, more successful businessman. Virgil owned about 45% of the Telegram. Cecil owned only 15 to 20%. However, Virgil died a much younger man than Cecil did in 1930. Virgil's estate passed on to three trustees who really couldn't agree on a path forward. That begins a really ugly, complicated legal situation, which I'm going to try to simplify and hope I get it accurate. Cecil Highland begins taking legal action in 1933. In 1934, he gets the other two trustees of his brother's estate removed. This gives him full control over the family estate. However, shortly before his brother died, he had taken out a loan with Empire National Bank and pledged shares of the Telegram as collateral. And there was a note attached with the shares that said they could be sold by the holder of the note. Now, you know the old story, possession is 9/10 of the law. The Empire National Bank, for some reason, moved these shares to a bank in Richmond, Virginia, and members of the Davis family found out about this and traveled overnight to Richmond, Virginia, and got possession of the shares, claiming they acted in the name of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Reconstruction Finance Corporation was a FDR New Deal era government agency which existed to build railroads or take control of railroads, failing industries, things like that. They bring these shares back to Clarksburg, and the directors of the Empire National Bank, minus the two Highland brothers, approved the sale of these shares to a man named John Kennedy of Elkins, West Virginia, who was a front man for the Hearst newspaper empire. Hearst Communications still exists. No, I think they own ESPN. They're a very large company. And chairman of the board of Empire National Bank at this time was Lewis A. Johnson, who went on to become Secretary of Defense under Harry Truman. So it seems at some level there may have been a plot by national level Democrats to undercut the Republican establishment in West Virginia by taking these shares and selling them. Well, Cecil Highland becomes aware of this and immediately moves in court to stop it. And he actually loses the court case, which goes all the way to the West Virginia Supreme Court. However, he still gets to argue about the sale price, and he says they were sold at far too low a price and they damaged my brother's estate. This court case goes on and on. As late as 1942, there's a case in the United States District Court of Appeals in Richmond, which becomes a landmark case in newspaper ownership law, I guess. And I'm not entirely sure all that came out of that, except that Cecil Highland ended up control of both newspapers again. However, during the 1930s, at the same time, the Hearst company was controlling the Clarksburg Exponent they began a radio station in Clarksburg, one in Charleston. They started a nationwide uh, radio station network, and Highland was very angry and opposed radio stations, radio communication for the rest of his life. He was so angry about this, he would not even allow an ad to be published in his newspaper. Someone could not even pay to have an ad in his newspaper. If it even barely mentioned radio in any way, he was just completely opposed to it. Well, the funny thing is that Highland wasn't just fighting with the John W. Davis machine and national level Democrats at this time. He was fighting with Republicans too, and in fact, he started fighting with them 5 years before his brother died. He had once been really close to Governor Gore and Senator Goff, but he fell out with them in 1925. Because in that year, newly elected President Herbert Hoover wanted to appoint a new U.S. Attorney for Northern District of West Virginia. Highland wanted his associate from Tyler County, Mr. I.M. Underwood, to be put in that job. I haven't been able to exactly establish what relationship this Underwood would be to another Underwood from Tyler County named Cecil Underwood, who was governor and other things in West Virginia from the 1960s to the early 2000s. I'm pretty sure there's a relationship just based on the name and how small Tyler County is, and the fact that they're both named Cecil. In any case, Senator Goff did not want Underwood for Attorney General, and he wanted a man named Arnold out of Mineral County. And Senator Gore backed Goff and the Republican establishment in the state. This really set Cecil Highland off, and he began to obstruct Governor Gore and his agenda in the state legislature. And then in 1928, Senator Goff begins his campaign for re-election, and Cecil Highland just starts attacking him viciously in the Clarksburg papers. Senator Goff actually was asked about what he thought, and he said, it paints a pathetic picture of a very badly muddled, embittered, soured, and unhappy politician. That's how he talked about Cecil Highland, and he said the voters thrice passed on him and given me their endorsement instead. I assume Cecil Highland had run against Goff in previous elections and lost. There was a lot of speculation that Highland himself would run for the Senate seat, but he didn't. He backed a man named James Elwood Jones of McDowell County, who was a coal baron and himself was kind of a renegade Republican who fought with the establishment in the northern part of the state. And Jones ran on a campaign of stabilizing the coal industry. Now, this was back in 1928, in the boom years before the Depression. And the coal industry was huge and growing, and they were already talking about how it needed government assistance to stay afloat. Uh, in any case, this Jones lost to Matt Neely of Fairmont, and Neely would serve and represent West Virginia in Congress for another 30 years till he died in 1958. It really helped build a Democrat machine to counter the Republicans in the state, and a lot of the old Republicans blamed Highland for this. During the Great Depression and World War II, Cecil Highland aligned himself with a group of Republicans that were referred to as Old School Republicans. These are the guys that want to do away with Social Security and all the other government programs, and they want to stay neutral in world affairs. They didn't think we should have gotten involved in World War II, etc., etc. New school Republicans would be people like Dwight Eisenhower, who, uh, commanding general in Europe during World War II, and became president and really just kind of accepted that some of the New Deal programs weren't going away, and you can maybe tone them down or make them more agreeable with Republican principles. Cecil Highland didn't like that, and he also spent most of the 1940s fighting with labor unions, both in his own paper. The printers that worked in his shop went on strike against him a couple times, but he also fought with coal unions and other unions and factories and things like that around the state. When the early 1950s rolled around, Highland found yet another enemy to fight with. He got into it with the Nutting family out of Wheeling over a TV station. There had been several attempts to bring television into Clarksburg, and Highland just was not having it. Now, in the case of the Nuttings, he said, they're trying to monopolize the news here in Clarksburg. And his argument for that was, well, they're already involved in newspapers, and they want to be involved in television too. However, that argument didn't get him very well, or very far, because Highland was in complete control of the news media in Clarksburg, and everyone knew it. So then he kind of switched his argument and said, well, the Nuttings don't need a TV station here, and we don't need WBOY. We don't need anything here because we already get the Wheeling stations loud and clear here. Perfect reception. And he wasn't really consistent in his arguments. He'd move from one to the other, and then they would contradict themselves, and it didn't matter because the paper didn't expect him to be consistent. They'd just report whatever he wanted and pretend like it had always been that way. Time magazine actually wrote about Highland twice in a national publication, okay? Once in 1953 and then again in 1957 or 58. The 1953 article was entitled The Iron Hand. It contains the following description of him, or his actions. The names of local citizens who displease Highland are banned from his papers, even though some of them hold public office. He has fought daylight savings time, a public sewage disposal project. He turned down ads for a community project to raise money for the widow of a local hero who saved 3 boys from drowning. By his own particular rules interpretation of nonpartisanship, the Exponent is a Democratic paper, the Telegram Republican, and during the campaign, each of them only prints the briefest news about the party it opposes, or he opposes. On the day that Harry Truman whistle stopped at Clarksburg, the Exponent carried not a word about it. So Highland's alleged Democrat newspaper did not even report that the Republican or the Democrat president who was running for a second term stopped in Clarksburg and gave a speech. Like, that's how just brazen he was. And then this article continues about his campaign against television. One of his papers reported that strangers and outsiders wanted to string dangerous overhead lines in town. The title, Danger to Life, Property Could Come from Cable, said a headline in the Telegram over a story suggesting that TV cables could kill children and burn down Clarksburg houses. As a compensation to parents, cash would be used in place of the child. Like, he claimed that it's going to kill your kids and they'll just hand you some money to make you go away. A picture of an ugly fire control tower was used as a picture of a TV tower. And papers pointed out that every TV set owner would have to pay hundreds of dollars a year to Wall Street exploiters. Asked Highland, do you think these New Yorkers sound like Americans to you? He's talking about a cable subscription would cost West Virginians hundreds of dollars a year. Never mind that, like, they had to pay for a newspaper subscription just to read this garbage. Uh, I'm laughing, but it doesn't really sound like the Clarksburg paper changed that much until around 2019. And then it only started changing, I think, because the people with money in the Clarksburg area and Harrison County just stopped caring what happened in Clarksburg. They didn't feel like I mean, people from Clarksburg, I'm used to be, um, don't matter anymore. They don't have to lie to us. We're just that unimportant. However, back in 1953, things were different. Clarksburg was still one of the premier cities in the state, by far the largest in Harrison County and in the region. In the previous 24 years, so 1929 to 1953, there were 17 different city managers. 17. I get to thinking about, well, Clarksburg can't keep a city manager. Um, that's probably been more often true in Clarksburg than it has not. What I'm saying is it's kind of normal for Clarksburg, and people who serve multiple years is abnormal. So, into this chaotic, strong man controls situation walk people like Dominic Policano and Christine McCuskey, who is the grandmother of current West Virginia Attorney General J.B. McCuskey. They ran as Republicans against what was a Democrat nominated city council. Back in those days, the council election was partisan. Like, now it doesn't matter what you're registered, you don't appear on a Republican or Democrat ballot or whatever. But back then, it was partisan. And Cecil Highland still controlled them, regardless of what party they belonged to, until these Republicans ran against him. And then we ended up with a situation with two rival city governments, and Cecil Highland in the background kind of pulling the strings, or to mix the metaphors, poking the fire. Uh, I won't talk too much about that right now. I'll make a video about that one soon. I'll holler at you later. Oh, and just a little bit of bonus content. As I was researching newspaper articles about Cecil Highland, I found at least two instances where local businessmen or politicians had come up and punched him in the face on the street. uh, okay. Have a good evening.